What's happening? Benton here. I guess we'll skip Psalm 23. I said it this morning. Anyway, going to be rewriting my. It's funny, my prayer that I prayed for many years, asking ye shall receive style. Um, with the current true knowledge of self, that one's going to need to be rewritten and rephrased. So, yeah, it's a holiday. My experience of holidays has been uh, much of the so-called truth community ain't around. What's up, Joe? Joe's here. Joe says peace and respect, Benton and Chad. Indeed, sir. Indeed. I read an article on the 4th of July this morning, having my coffee. We're almost off the coffee. I'm down to 12-ounce coffees, and I don't even drink the whole thing. So one of these days, one of these days. Um, I forgot what I was going to say. That never happens. What's up, Ms. High? Oh, I've already been followed around the grocery store this morning. Yeah, there's that already. I said, man, can I please just pick out some eggs and leave this store? Oh yeah, California. I was reading an article this morning about how apparently now the highest number of polled Californians have said, right, that they would vote to leave the United States if that was on the ballot. 44% of the people asked said that they would, which is not the same thing as 44% would vote. It's actually a completely different thing. What people, report on a survey. And yes, indeed, I trust the day will be good, Sam. Two very different things, but apparently Californians, like 80% of, and I'm going from memory, but something like 80% of Californians uh, would want, if they remained in the United States, apparently would want to be able to enforce borders and decide who to let into the state from other U.S. states, which I find interesting. And if folks don't know this, California gets screwed over on the federal taxes. They pay in way, way more as a state than what they take back from the feds. Yeah, that's the thing. So that's interesting. Uh, Having spent enough time over the years in California, it's definitely quite a bit different than the rest of the U.S. in many ways. Most definitely. Still hitting the vapes pretty hard. More so in the later part of the day than the morning. And the great healing. There's a great healing, folks. And I have no way of knowing anything about the great healing beyond my own experience of the great healing. So I'm witness, right? I'm bearing witness and providing my testimony of the existence of a great healing. Uh, and I am actively healed perpetually, and I'm aware of it. And it's not it's not something I'm inventing in my mind. It's an experience. It is experienced. Again, in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. Um, that is my experience. So I want to frame that properly, because more and more I'm seeing, virtually all phenomenon or phenomena through the lens of the proper definition, my knowing that this place exists at the level of delusion. In fact, that's its nature is a delusion. Um, that is the nature of this place, exists as delusion, which I believe accounts for the waking dream. Well, I shouldn't say I believe. It makes logical sense to me at this time that that this helps explain the surrealistic, waking dream unreality aspects. And some may say computer simulation, reality, the unfolding reality would perhaps suffice. However one wants to approach this. But then, and I will discontinue reading the comments now. Shout out to the chat. And from reading the comments over time, and this is not the majority of the audience, but folks, I've noticed, and I do speak about some of these topics publicly, and a lot of times passersby or other people, I've referred to this as putting their own stink on the ideas, but it seems like, and I used to be this way, I'm certain. So I'm not, I understand why people would react this way, but, it's an attempt to reconcile, uh, a new idea or what seems to be a novel sort of angle or spin on an older idea that they're familiar with, a lot of times through religion. So then, and I'm certain that I know the reason why humans react this way. It's an attempt to explain, to fit what I'm asserting, sort of into their existing framework again, so that as a being, their entire worldview, their own belief systems are not threatened, because the human seeks efficiency, above all else, generally speaking. And and then the negative states of being, perhaps around, how disorienting, how discomfiting, right? Uh, how painful, and just uh, even existential type of notions, identity. A person is acting in the delusory realm based on a certain, specific, what they believe to be their identity, and some of these ideas, can threaten their very identity, such as, I'm speaking of a great healing. Many people are ill. Many people, have relatives in poor states of health, especially culturally, like where I'm from in Arkansas, the deep South, where effectively everyone who's not overweight and obese or obese is on methamphetamine. This is one of the unhealthiest parts of the country. So virtually everybody's health is in ruins. Now, certainly there's certain actions that I took to receive the great healing. Now, and this is another part of human psychology that I'm very aware of, especially, as I'm certain that I will be speaking publicly, and have been, but will continue to speak publicly in the streets about some of these matters, is um, did I lose my point again? Bear with me, folks. We will get on track, I assure you. It's something about how people would react to what I'm saying. Um, well, I lost it. Thank you for your patience. It will come back around. Um, and I've been working a lot with the concepts of religion, and not just Christianity. Apparently, I guess I had known this and forgotten that is the world's apparently most popular religion. Um, but addressing a lot of this in a religious context, and then religion being a system of man, right? Corrupt by nature, humankind within delusion, unable to create and operate systems that are free from corruption. And it seems like a lot of folks will immediately want to ask questions, and I think this is one of the reasons that I harp so much on the concept of mind, body, and spirit in alignment. And as much as I have a propensity to, enjoy intellectual discourse, ideas, And I do tend to over intellectualize matters, even when that's not appropriate. And I would assert that it's not appropriate. Um, anytime I'm speaking on, especially something like a great healing, um, if a person that I'm mentioning that to, or that hears me or overhears me, if that's a religious person, or someone socialized and brought up in a Christian context, it seems like they are going to want to drag me in my very essence into that dead framework of dogma and doctrine. And make no mistake, folks, doctrine can't live, right? A church can have a book, right? And ideas and doctrines and dogmas, all of that belongs to this place. Like, all of that's dead. That belongs here. And in fact, I had a conversation with a man who is all the time making signs with in English and in Spanish. He's a Spanish fellow, but from the U.S. I'm almost certain. Not that I don't care; it doesn't matter to me. But from this part of the country, or the continent, certainly. And he actually struck up a conversation with me. He probably saw or heard about my preaching, most likely. And there was a bit of a language barrier. So perhaps he might have grown up in Mexico with English as a second language, later on. There's a bit of his English was fine, but there are times when a person is speaking somewhat excitedly and it's hard to pick up all of what's being said. But I've been very aware of this for quite some time. It's this attempt to sort of bring the conversation, and by extension to bring the truth that is being manifested, that I'm observing and speaking on in the moment, to bring that into a dead context of corrupt religion and dead doctrine and dead scripture. And so that's where we get to something that I find comfort in, which is and again, not a Bible channel, not a Jesus channel, but these matters, some of these ideas, and some in scripture does become it does play a part at a certain point. John 14:26, but the Comforter, and that's a capital C, the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name. This is Jesus talking. Now, people may say, as soon as they hear Jesus talking, they say, well, a lot of people will disavow the existence of a historical Jesus. Well, that's fine, as long as the person recognizes that the disavowal is always in the context of the realm existing as a delusion, meaning not entirely real. So, number one, is it that unlikely that there would have been a Jesus Christ as a historical person within a delusion? Number one, waking dreams, surrealistic, unreality aspects present. But then again, if there wasn't a historical Jesus within a delusory realm, and I was able to, reach the receiving of what I have received and continue to receive in the forms of healing, deliverance, true knowledge of self, and all of these things, right? I mean, we're still talking about a delusion, right? And not my delusion, not entirely anyway. Not Benton. Again, Benton exists only within this delusory realm, as far as the idea of a discrete human being, descended from all these other Bentons, and on and on and on, back into history. Does it really matter? Like, what's the difference? And I understand this is to a person who's not. So this is the danger of the ideas, and this was pointed out to me when I first got back to LA. A person who's not mind, body, and spirit, who's not risen to a certain level of consciousness within themselves, a certain level of practice, and being able to center themselves in, again, reality, which within delusion maybe, but I think you know what I mean there. To be strongly centered within themselves in relation to day-to-day life within delusion, I think is a good way to put it. And if I'm able to sort of toot my own horn and pat myself on the back, I did that first, even though I didn't really know that that's what I was doing. If that makes sense. Yeah, I did that part first. I set a very strong foundation in not losing my mind. So I don't personally feel any obligation or any responsibility for speaking about the reality or the truth that this place exists via delusion. The fact that unenlightened persons of low spiritual development may become confused. Well, there's virtually limitless avenues for people to go further into confusion, right? TikTok apparently is a big arena for going further into confusion. There's many avenues. I'm not going to internalize. I refuse to internalize notions around. Well, there's problems, Benton, and you're the problem. And how much of this place is set up to operate that way? The tallest lily syndrome, so called. But John 14:26. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. So the church doesn't teach me all things. It says right here, Jesus talking. It says the Holy Ghost shall teach me all things. Yeah, that's what's happening. That's what's been happening. Right. Baptism in the Holy Spirit. But not fake it till you make it. Right. Not dead doctrine, dead dogma, dead scripture. They say, well, you're reading the dead scripture. Well, I am. However, perhaps there are truths to be made manifest, and manifested truth is never not alive. Right. And then the subtleties of these things. But I do find that term remembrance to be very interesting, especially with me talking so much about the sacrifice of the spiritually perfect and innocent child to a pagan deity known as Moloch. Right, this system of business transactions, industry, corporatism, everything, and it's the source of all of humanity's problems in the United States, I should say. And I do want to make clear, I'm speaking almost always in a specific context of the United States of America, and then more broadly, perhaps North America, but almost always in that specific context. So I'm certain it's not entirely this way everywhere. I suspect that America is the vanguard of these movements towards, eventually there will be nothing whatsoever, in my view, that's not directly tied into business and finance, banking, industry, and all of these things, computers, algorithms, money, right? So how can there be a church? How can there be a Christian religion with a Bible, and the church by definition is a business? And the book says, well, only one of two masters can be served, meaning the person in the church pew is able to serve the Most High or serve money, and it specifically money's mentioned. And that to me it's this well-worn cliche of in the world, not of the world. Well, regardless of the arena in which one finds oneself, this realm is set up by definition to preclude the person from serving the Most High. Because if that's true, if it's always a choice between the service of the Most High as master, right? And I have my own thoughts on that too, especially based on the true knowledge of self. And then now here I am in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions and socialized, well, first sacrificed to a pagan deity, Moloch, who apparently is involved in industry, business, and all of this. And then, almost all effort, you know, uh, in my young life directed towards, you know, uh, public education, indoctrination. Let's coach little Benton up so that he can serve his master, which is this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. I was not taught to serve the Most High as a master, even as I was raised up in a religious context. And you can debunk the validity of the particular, sect that I was exposed to, and I can also do that with all sect. I can do that to any religion or sect. So what's the difference? The fact that the particular flavor I came up through, you know, is debunkable. Yeah, they're all debunkable. Who cares? I can debunk any of them. They have no authority, right? Um, there is no authority there. But remembrance is an interesting term, because when I've asserted that at a certain point, when it was a little more of the fake it till you make it days of all of these years of spiritual practice and meditation and walking and really figuring out a lot of concepts spiritually and developing mind, body, and spirit, eventually at a certain point I became aware. It's like, oh, I'm actually all of this, what I'm attempting to fake it till I make it to, at the time, I'm just trying to get back to where I started, which was what? The spiritual innocence and perfection of the newborn, the helpless, the physically helpless child, right? And so remembrance is interesting in this context, because remembrance is the act of remembering, a holding in mind or bringing to mind. It also means recollection. So then remember is to not forget. And so as that's what's happened here. Again, the spiritually innocent child, spiritually perfect, sacrificed to Moloch. Um, so the bringing all things to my remembrance, is that an acknowledgement of the forgetting of my own nature, right? And this place being set up to seemingly keep me from doing everything but serving, from the perspective of this realm, the incorrect of the two masters. Because back to thesis and antithesis, if thesis is the authority and validity of the Most High, the most super intelligent force of power, love, and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit, if that's proposition or thesis, so antithesis, again, via Moloch's machine and of business, corporation, government, all of these systems of man, right? And then seemingly the being serving one of those two in every new moment, right? And it's one or the other. It's not both, right? It's not Dave Ramsey. I had to pause. My speech was inciting a homeless person that was wandering by. It's not Dave Ramsey who uses the Christianity to bolster his businesses. And I've heard him say this many times now. And this is why I listen to content that I'm not involved in, any of the Dave Ramsey type of stuff. And people get confused sometimes with the content that I take in. But I've heard him say several times that, his approach to his great wealth that he was born into, people may not be aware. Dave Ramsey's never known a day in his life where he wasn't wealthy, right? He's always been wealthy. So it's born into wealth. So Dave's approach is, well, we're not rich, we're not wealthy because we're Christians. We believe in, and I'm speaking from his perspective, they believe in God. So everything belongs to God. So the money is God's money. We just manage it. Right. So to me, this already sounds like, well, Dave either knows or doesn't know that when he talks about God and religion, he's talking about Satan and Satanism. Yeah, dressed up as Christianity, but it's not that. It's just not to follow. It's not to follow the teachings of the Lord Christ Jesus. I mean, this is how insane this realm can be. Again, to me, that's surrealistic. The notion of um, serving the Most High by properly managing uh, material wealth. You know, as if that's one's life's mission. Oh well, we're just caretakers of God's property here, is what Dave tries to say, which I find fascinating. It's a fascinating, and it says a lot about the nature of this place, in my view. Um, so I'm not sure people can really tell the difference. That's the thing is in this idea of serving only one of two masters. Well, if in order for antithesis to triumph, a big part of that would be, well, what if from antithesis's or the enemy's perspective, the thing that would make me its enemy is more, see, again, inverted, right? What I am doesn't create enemies for itself. It doesn't make enemies. So antithesis has made an enemy of what I am. So it's a very important distinction. And so we see the confusion, certainly, great confusion as well. Yeah, fascinating. Um, and does antithesis, it has no concern over if the people who are serving the system of money and business, if they falsely believe themselves to be serving creation and the Most High and love. And probably antithesis would enjoy that, I'm assuming. I don't know, but probably perhaps antithesis would get a kick out of that, right? Um, oh, look at these bozos. They think they're serving the Most High, and in fact, they're cursing their own blessing by serving a system of money, a dead system of dead money, right? And again, back to the Comforter, right? He shall teach me all things. So how have I been taught, right? How do I know that uh, render unto the Caesar means, let the dead bury the dead? Well, the Holy Ghost taught me that, right? It came to me as an epiphany because what's the what was the context that Jesus spoke in when he said render unto Caesar? It was the Pharisees were continuously following him around trying to trip him up with legalese, right? And Jesus was, by his own presence and preaching and activities, Jesus was the enemy of the state. This is very important to realize. And it would have been a very different culture, a very different world back then. And again, some people will say, well, there wasn't ever an historical Jesus. Well, guess what? This is a delusion anyway. So strictly speaking, this isn't happening at all. So what are we even talking about, right? It's like it exists because enough people know about it and believe in it. Like, yeah, it's real on some level. Right. I don't know that a time machine is necessary to build a time machine and go back and to validate these things. Oh, and that was what I was trying to get onto earlier. That was the concept that eluded me, was that truth doesn't have to be validated by ignorance. Shout out to Dick Gregory. That was the point that I tried to make earlier. That when I begin speaking on certain topics, people want to put their own stink on it because they need to rationalize and reconcile it through their own current understanding. Unfortunately, their current understanding represents ignorance. So, truth doesn't have to, there's no reason to validate truth with someone's ignorance. That was the point I was attempting to make. But people try it anyway. And I'm sure I've been guilty of that in the past. So the Pharisees were following Jesus around trying to trip him up on some legalese. So they're basically just confronting him with, hey, the law, the authorities expect that you're going to get a job and you're going to pay taxes. Now, they might not have been directing that at Jesus directly, but it's this idea of, well, Jesus is gathering a following, right? So we're already into the jealousy and the power, right, of the Pharisees, seeking a certain, reward in this delusory realm of business transactions, right? And I think it even refers to them as the type of people that they want to be dressed up in robes. They want to be seen in certain social, movements. They, certain social contexts. These are people who are, their reward is here, right? And they're going after their reward. They're doing it via religion, right? The business of religion. So they're asking Jesus, basically, they're trying to get him in an aha moment where they can go, aha, he's teaching his followers, he's gathering all of these followers and he's teaching them not to pay taxes, right? Which again, a threat to the system, you know, and psyop or not, which I'm sure it was a psyop, but even the Branch Davidians, Waco, on some level, that was the system telling the people, oh, you think you're going to go live based on certain principles, separate from the system. Well, this is what's may happen, right? And same thing with Jesus to an extent. The system, does deal with those folks. It seems. So Jesus, he's sort of in a position. You know, what's he going to do? Remain silent or come up with an answer? But the answer needs to be something that the Pharisees can't refute, or now we're going to do another round of whataboutisms, right? He needs to be something that will satisfy them, at least based on their own rules of engagement. And so the render unto Caesar, right? Give him what belongs to Caesar, right? Well, what belongs to Caesar is death, right? Again, back to the two masters. If it's the Most High, that's life, right? Money's death, right? Government is death. Business is death. That's all of that is the stuff that it is of this world. That's the things that can never leave this place. Caesar can't leave this place. And Caesar, means government, I'm pretty sure, in that context, right? He's just referring to the secular governmental, business, society, the non-religious part of society, you know. And so to me, it's an acknowledgement of Caesar or government, or the powers of this realm, right? Principalities and spiritual powers in high places and all of this stuff. That is what's in the process of vacuuming up all of the wealth, right? And it's doing it by impressing, or by pressing. There's a word here, I can't quite think of it, but it's when someone is against their will pushed into like a war, right? But not a draft. I mean, where they just basically go and grab the people and make them fight the war. And uh, that's what this place is. This place is after the sacrifice to Moloch. It's grabbing, physically taking the child and compulsorily, right? Compulsory education. It's putting them into a system of business and money, which is death. And now we're back to cursing one's blessing again. The with true knowledge of self, unlocking that achievement, knowing that what I am is one with that force that will never know death, doesn't know what death means, only knows life, right? Only perhaps within delusion able to interface and act within those concepts, which again are probably not real at all. That there's probably actually nothing real to death. Again, um, seemingly only within delusion is that even possible. right? But until the person unlocks the achievement, which most never will, of true knowledge of self, if that's even possible for them, if they are even that. See, there's a lot of ifs here, but Benton, right, performing in the performing of Benton, here Benton is speaking, in this way to the listener with knowledge of what I am, and with knowledge of what I am, again, in inverted world, now I know exactly what I'm not, right? And I know what my function is, I know what my function is not. So render unto Caesar, right? Meaning, well, Caesar is of this world, the money's of this world, everything Caesar claims as his own is of this world, let him have it, right? And again, that's a way to answer the what is an accusation. It's an implied accusation, because I'm pretty sure, it doesn't seem like Jesus sought employment or worked as an adult. Yeah, maybe he was trained as a carpenter, I don't know, but whatever, doesn't matter. This is not a person who came to town as a hobo. And a hobo, in American culture, some people forget, a hobo was a person, an itinerant worker who would show up in town and do whatever work was available that they were capable of, right? Wasn't a bum. A hobo, traveled around the country, an itinerant worker, right? So Jesus wasn't rolling into town, and saying, "Hey, what work may I perform for some shekels, right? That I may, pay for the government and pay taxes to support the government." And I don't know, is there any example in the Bible of Jesus, directly with his own actions supporting the government? Because every single person, involved in, on the books employment in this country is directly supporting, this world. It's the evil, wicked system of things. And, Christianity, I believe, in my opinion, has a lot to do with this notion of, oh, you can still just go have a regular job, have cable TV, have the internet, have all the creature comforts of life, have a car, a decent home, although that's all changed to some extent. But historically, this idea that all of that can be done, um, and the person is going to, at some point, be in the world but not of the world. It's like, well, no, that's a person who, if they are what I am, that's a being that is not of this world, who's allowing this world to cause them to make themselves over in the image of this world. So it's, on the one hand, the idea that, humans are created in the image and likeness of the Most High, right? And I'm only talking about this as an idea. On the one hand, it's that, and on the other hand, it's the individual sacrifices a baby to Moloch, and then their endeavors through the system of employment and business is actually, what that is serving is to create a visage or an image, right, that for themselves, that they also show to the world, especially nowadays through social media. But it's also held up before Moloch, so that Moloch can determine, so Moloch can pass judgment. Have I done good enough with the consumption? Have I done good enough with the career? Have I done good enough, with seeking what this world has to offer? Well, I, with true knowledge of self, am operating and performing within an vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, and what I am is of far greater value than anything to be discovered or found in this place. There's nothing here that has even one millionth of the value of what I am. And to know that, and to be able to confidently speak that from knowing. See, there's no faking it till you make it, right? Now, there was an ask and ye shall receive, and then there was a patient uh, surrender to the feminine, passive yin form of the yin and the yang, which is, I have no way of knowing if this is ever going to happen. Now, this is where I'm now remembering the topic I started to go into earlier in the broadcast, which is trust, right? I was willing to go along for many years, trusting that all of these concepts that I had discovered or studied were in fact real or potentially real, and recognizing that, especially in America, all effort is directed through the yang or the masculine or the assertive, which is, hey, you better go out and get you some healing, right? So when I talked about there's a great healing, the individual will immediately say, oh, well, I got to go out and get me some of that. Well, that's not receiving, that's a taking, right? So that would be to go out and to take the healing. Well, that's not how it works. The healing is received, right? And some people may say, well, how do I do that? I know how it happened for me, and I'm able to testify and be a witness to that. I can't answer for another person. How will they achieve that? Because they may never achieve it. And in fact, I trusted, this idea of the faith of a mustard seed. And I'm not saying that what I did was that exactly, but it's something in that vein. But, I trusted while and continued to trust while removing myself from the outcome, meaning I was okay with trusting and surrendering and accepting passively solely based on the potential for what could happen, right? Not based on, well, I'm working my butt off and now I'm entitled and by golly, this better happen. Meanwhile, how much am I going to martyr myself? Hey, I'm, looking at my watch. Well, it's day 800 of me, doing all of these things. Where's my true knowledge of self? It's like, well, Benton trusted for like 10 plus years and it just finally fucking happened. Um, it may have never happened. I may have died before, well, and nearly did die before it could happen. And again, back to the scripture here, remembrance. In fact, it's not a going out and getting, oh, I better go out and get me some remembrance. Well, what I've learned about memory is that if I know there's something in my mind and I'm not able to get to it right now, the more effort I assertively put into trying to find it, that actually prevents the thing from happening. It creates a blockage, right? What I know is, okay, well, if I trust that it's somewhere in my mind and it may pop back into my consciousness, right? Which has happened before. I had an experience many years ago in my travels where um, I knew that I had seen this address, a street address, on my email, and then I lost my phone, which is very unlike me. This was many years ago, and my car was parked at that address. And from experience, I knew, and I do have a little bit of a photographic memory, I knew that the harder I racked my brain to try to get to wherever that snapshot of that address was in my head, that would prevent me from actually ever remembering it. But if I was willing to trust and accept and surrender to the notion that I may not be able to remember the address, right? And then later on, poof, it just magically popped into my head. And there it was. And I was able to, do what needed to be done. And so, subtly working within these concepts, um, this is what I'm talking about, the growth, mind, body, and spirit. And it's simply not going to be possible for most folks. I mean, that's just the reality. Which is why I have no belief or no, I'm one of these every man hath not the same office type of people. I have no notion that, when somebody starts talking about our purpose, I'm like, what do you mean our purpose? We don't have a purpose. It's, or just humanity's purpose. Like, what do you mean humanity's purpose? Um, it's been part of my path of progress to get to this point and move beyond, perhaps, right? Um, that's just simply not going to be the function for everybody. Um, yeah. But yeah, remembrance, very interesting term. So part of it was recollection or recollection. Recollection is the power of recalling ideas to the mind or the period within which things can be recollected, remembrance. Well, that was a couple of mid 20s white girls heard the strong masculine voice and had to ridicule it with their laughter. I don't know if y'all could hear that, but that's a very specific thing. Yeah. Uh, and having no idea what I'm actually saying, just simply the strong male voice. And that's what people don't realize. And I don't want to get off into this too much, but the so-called traditional family values conservatives don't realize they're sending their, or maybe they do and don't care, they're sending their daughters off to be indoctrinated to become communists, and to actually, part of that is, the idea of a strong male authority in the traditional sense. Well, that's simply cannot be allowed, right? And then the leftist notion of, again, Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. It's true. Whatever that is treated as if it's ridiculous. So the laughter of ridicule directed at my strong male voice. Like this is actually happens. And I know people will gaslight me and try to say, well, oh, that's paranoid, or no, it's a real thing. It happens quite often. And in fact, one of these communistas, it's always a white girl. Um, when I first got back to LA, walking through the park, loudly said the word conservative directed at me, which I found interesting. But back to the remembrance here, um, that which is recollected, something called to mind, a reminiscence. So back to the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name. He shall teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance. And that gets us to reminiscence. Did I write down reminiscence? Yeah, reminiscence is an act of remembering long past experiences. So back to my idea of actually remembering, or having a notion of, all of this spiritual stuff, which a lot of it is just a bunch of nonsense in the early stages, the idea of a spiritual seeker and all of these things, a lot of it, a lot of dead ends. And, at a certain point becoming aware, oh, I'm just trying to go back to where I started anyway, which is some hint towards the true knowledge of self in a way. Is, hey, bozo, it's right there inside of you the whole time. And it always has been, and it always will be. Can you unblock, whatever is preventing you from directly accessing that, right? Stop making the blockages, continue to rise mind, body. And this is me talking to me, right? Continue to rise mind, body, and spirit. But yes, an act of remembering long past experiences, especially positive or pleasant ones, often fondly. And it also means a mental image thus remembered. And also back to recollection, archaic or Catholicism, the act or practice of collecting or concentrating the mind. Well, that's meditation right there. That's what meditation is. Concentration, self-control. But that's archaic, so it doesn't really mean that anymore. And then number 5, from Catholicism, a spiritual retreat, especially one that is short. Now, here's what's interesting. Retreat's another word for what? Surrender. A spiritual. Now they mean retreat in going to a place, some sort of formalized, even if it's just, I'm going to go off to my own private space and spend a few hours, sort of, getting myself right, as my people would call it, getting right. But it's also the English language is fascinating because a spiritual retreat, especially one that is short. But yeah, I like that retreat. Again, surrender. And so what I've noticed with some folks have a lot of a lot of problems with the concept of a spiritual surrender. Well, that's a lack of trust. Well, I trust me, right? I go all the way back to Public Enemy's album "Fear of a Black Planet," and shout out to Flavor Flav. He says, who I trust, me. Who you trust, man? Which is, I mean, that's a lot of fucking wisdom in that. Yeah, I trust me, right? Now, part of that is making oneself trustworthy in the first place. That's back to many years ago, me recognizing introspectively, oh, I've been assuming I'm a good person. In fact, after starting meditation and reviewing my past actions, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Not only am I not a good person, or I wasn't at the time, I was faced with the reality that I was a bad person, which immediately I understood, okay, that means I have the power to create a good person. So that was actually encouraging. I wasn't discouraged to realize that I was a bad person. Although, yeah, I mean, there was certainly didn't feel good, but there was an optimism, and okay, now there's the opportunity to create a so-called good person through my actions. Right? There's power in that. So yeah, fascinating how much is in the scripture, and I treat the Bible like I treat pretty much like I've treated almost all other books in nonfiction and spirituality, religion, philosophy, sociology, psychology, all of these topics I find interesting. I take what works for me and I leave the rest. Period. So virtually the entirety of the Old Testament doesn't work for me whatsoever. Who cares? I never agreed to. At no point in my life have I ever agreed to follow the KJV in the English language, and like now that's my rule book, right? Because as soon as the person does that, what happens? Now they've created their own golem in the form of, now there's a metaphorical and could be literal, but now there's a group of Pharisees who are continuously going to hound the person with doctrine and dogma, dead doctrine and dead dogma. I don't have time for that. What some human beings wrote in the Torah or whatever the Old Testament is, that's neither here nor there for me. Now, if I find something useful in there and make use of it, yeah, sure, that's different. That's me, a diamond in the rough, as it were, right? Uh, you know, it's here for me. I'm not here for it. And again, antithesis would like to say, okay, well, okay, Benton represents spirit, right? Well, spirit gets folded into religion, right? And so because of specific religion, now Benton's in a trap. It's like, no, I'm not. Of course I'm not. What do you mean? Again, the quickening spirit. All I have to do is vibrate higher. That's a weapon. That's religion formed as a weapon against me. Taking aim, it fires the missile. Well, I've already vibrated faster. That's what the quickening spirit does. It takes evasive action by vibrating faster than what it was vibrating at when the weapon fired. So I'm not on that level that the weapon was fired at. That's what no weapon formed against me shall prosper means. Actually, it can't, because the quickening spirit is always able to vibrate higher or faster, actually, more correctly. A quickening spirit. That's what that means. Now, people read the Bible and some of them are Bible scholars. Some people are formally educated at a university level in the Bible, theology. They make they make their career, they make their business, they earn their living with the Bible, and never ever even are taught the meaning of a quickening spirit. Even when their book says, but the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things. Well, that's how I know this, right? So again, I have my basis for compassion towards these people is 99.9% of these folks are never going to receive baptism in the Holy Spirit. It's just never going to happen. And if it hadn't happened for me all those years ago, right, I also would be cut off from what? The Most High. It's to be cut off from what? My own nature. Again, a curse replacing or uh, subverting blessing, right? Just like the creative force is subverted through this delusion. It's the same thing. It's a subversion of blessing and being replaced by a curse, right? Symbolically, and antithesis via Moloch's machine of business and industry and business transactions and finance and government being involved in always directing the individual's attention to the matters of this place. Well, this place is not. This place has never been about anything. There's never been anything of value in this place. Because remember, I'm not here. What I am, what I am one with, exists beyond all of this. Right? God don't exist within a delusion. Right? The potential experience of delusion exists within, and I don't like the word God in this context. Actually, it all of that exists within the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit. See, again, inverted world, wants to make it seem like, well, there's the earth and there's the universe and there's all of these things, but practically speaking, for the individual human, this place is what exists. And the Christian idea perhaps of this is, you're here, it's a one-off, you better not fuck it. It's really just, it's a negative motivation of, you better not fuck it up or you're going to be damned to hell, right? It's like, what I am will never know hell. What I am can't possibly have any concept. Like, what do you mean? See, that this is, it's a lot of what this place is. It's mind control via gaslighting the individuals into accepting ideas that are on their face untrue. Again, if, and back to the philosophy of solipsism, but if in fact what I am and what I'm one with is the same thing that is what is your essence, which may very well be the case. But I have to at least allow for the possibility that it would, in some ways, this place would make a lot more sense, because if everyone out here is in fact has if almost everybody has Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, then that's all the more reason for me to be very, very disappointed in my fellow humans. But then I was also a disappointing fellow human. In earlier iterations of Benton, I was also that as well. Very disappointing. This Benton would have been is very disappointed in that. But not in the long run, but certainly in a vacuum, statically. And then again, I've said for many years now on this channel, I'm optimistic with respect to the transcendent potential of the individual or an individual. It's pessimistically, there's no, the idea of strength in numbers is simply not true. With respect to society and the masses and an underclass, it's actually the opposite. The more, and I know we see this with America today. It seems to me now, part of the reason the country was built up to the point it's been built up, as far as the amount of people, the infrastructure, the way society has supposedly advanced or purportedly advanced, a lot of that, seemingly happened, to perpetuate the system to a certain point. And then the people so identified with the realm because of their mind control, there's a lot of this confusion around, well, why can't, people earn a living anymore? Well, because it no longer suits the realm for you to be able to make a living anymore. So people allowed themselves to be sold a bill of goods in the past that, oh, well, Americans were just better than everybody else in the post-war period, and Americans built the country up through their own competence and hard work and all of it. No, that's not what happened. Americans did what Americans always do. They behave based on their mind control. So, and the mind control of many years ago in the post Second War period was to build up the country. So that's the mind control said, okay, woman, you're going to marry a man. Hey, man, you're going to marry a woman. You're going to have some kids. The man's going to work at the factory down up the road. And, mom's going to be, the woman's going to be Susie Homemaker. And people behave that way. It wasn't because they were superior. It wasn't because they were taught better, right? Because if they were superior and they were taught better, how did that wear off so quickly? Well, it didn't wear off. It was never there in the first place. The mind control compelled them to behave that way, right? It wasn't they were just better. Well, now they were less degenerated. They were less decadent. They were less depraved, but they were still degenerate, decadent, and depraved. And again, what suited Moloch's machine at the time was to have a more, a less open society morally, right? People, in order to be accepted in society, that they had to at least keep up an appearance of a certain moral standard. It was necessary. And how much of the people's identity was tied up in all. And again, the person's antithesis tying up the person's own identity into, right, things that simply are not real. Again, back to the delusory nature of the realm. That was never real. And it cannot be recreated unless the moment the system needs Americans to again perform the Ozzie and Harriet routine of the 1950s, that's exactly what America will do. The instant that that's what serves Moloch's machine, that's exactly, you'll just see, you'll be, wow, look, everybody's back to 1950s living. Now, I'm sort of making a point, meaning, I don't expect that to happen, but that would be the cause. It wouldn't be because, these traditional family values, Christian Americans make America great again style, they finally pulled their heads out of their asses and went back to moral righteous living. Well, it wasn't moral righteous living in the 50s. That's what people had to do, right, to be accepted in their society and their locally, and they're accepted in their peer groups. It's just like now, there's no choice, right? And everything gets brought back to, well, I have to make a living and I have to feed my family. Well, where is that in the Bible? I missed that part. Can you point me to the section of the Bible, well, I've got to feed my family section of the Bible, and we have to earn a living? Like, where is that? Can somebody find that part for me? Because what I'm realizing, it's a hidden in plain sight, but that the central theme of the actual teachings, of Jesus in the canonical gospel, actually, I guess well, let's just say the Gospels. We'll start there. I'm seeing now that I'm beginning to go back into a study of this stuff because my knowledge is lacking in certain areas. Brushing up on some of my education with respect to the Bible, so that I can speak intelligently. But the central theme of Jesus's teaching is to get the person through their own attainment, mind, body, and spirit, and by, via Christ consciousness, if we want to call it that. Again, it's just awareness, right? Why do we need to be scared of, how can there be fear of calling something a consciousness? A Christian will talk about God. Are you telling me that's not a consciousness? I don't. What are we talking about? I'm not saying that's all it is. But yeah, I think you understand what I'm on about. I sort of lost my point there, but the central theme is, and see, Jesus presumably, I'm just guessing, I don't know, but perhaps wasn't free to go out into the streets and just tell people not to support the system with their tax dollars and with their efforts in labor, right? And I don't know what it was like back then. I've never been particularly interested in history for the sake of history. I know very little about that supposed period in time, but looking at the present moment in the present society. And then if I apply my own understanding of the teachings of Jesus to 2025, what I would then say would be the core tenet of Jesus's teachings would be: do not seek employment, do not support the evil, wicked system with my blood, sweat, tears, effort, and toil. Right. But then immediately the person is, okay, well, how does this happen? How does that happen? How do you, well, the thing is it a Christian asking me, how do I feed myself? Because the Bible says not to worry about where your next meal's coming from. And again, I never agreed to follow that. That's something I've tested, right? Again, test the spirits. That's something I've tested, and I've uh, confirmed it to be true in my life. And I trust that going forward, that will be the case. And again, what I'm one with, lacks the ability to fear where its next meal's coming from anyway. So it's sort of neither here nor there. It kind of doesn't matter. It's not, I'm not concerned with that, but I understand the knee-jerk reactions of other folks, certainly. And in every answer, every question, the expected answer of the individual is, okay, but what about this area where I don't know how to live except when engaged in business? That's really what the person is saying. Is they're asking a question, but in some way it's an acknowledgement that without a system of business, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves, which I believe to be true. It seems that's the reality is folk with the Stockholm syndrome and people being so ran through by the system, right? After having been, sacrificed to Moloch as babies, right? And that's my assertion, but seems it answers a lot of questions for me. It makes a lot of sense to me. Largely metaphorical, but still, when people are slaving away to make rich people richer, uh, sacrificed and given up to a system, handed over to a system of business and a system of finance and industry. I mean, I can't come up with any more accurate, clearer description of the activities that this realm is performing. So back to people wanting to ask, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we do that if we don't seek employment and we don't pay into the tax system and all of these things, right? Well, I would say first, the book says not to worry about that, but then what I would ask is a question: would a proper society ever, number one, be based almost entirely in business and business transactions? And number two, would a proper society see fit so that all systems of supporting oneself, right, having shelter, having food, the basic fundamental requirements of life, why is all of that a business? Like, why is the food supply a business in the first place? It doesn't have to be a business. And in fact, the history of America, the time in which the food supply was mostly the product of big business, very large business, that's relatively short compared to the rest of the history of the country. This is where society has advanced and progressed to, is a food system that's almost entirely, owned and operated by big business. And then, of course, to the detriment of the mind, body, and spirit of the people. Just the fact that the food supply is inseparable from the systems of business at this point. Yeah, I understand people can do lots of things around growing their own. I understand that. I'm not talking about there not being ways around it. And in fact, I've already acknowledged that, well, based on what I know, you know, it's going to work out the way it's supposed to work out. In fact, um, I'm taught, not necessarily, well, again, what I am can't worry itself about where its next meal's coming from. Now, that will be a very different thing, if a couple of days go by and I haven't eaten, then it's a very different approach, right? It's easy for Benton to say this and I'm aware of this. It's very easy for me to say when I have access to plenty of nutritious food in the short term. It's quite easy for me to say. And I understand already and I'm actually looking forward to the near future in a way of not having money and not, you know, what then? It's sort of and a competitor, a person such as me who's very, very competitive compared to other people, definitely on the higher end of that spectrum of competitiveness. It is a testing of myself in a way. It's like, oh, we're about to find out, And again, I already know, uh, again, what I am passes all of those tests. What I'm one with, you test it till the cows come home. It's never found lacking, right? It's never found lacking. And then the reality is, some of what I'm speaking on here, in order to raise myself up, mind, body, and spirit to these levels, there's been a lot of uh, courage, the repeated application of courage. And the reality is, virtually everybody's a fucking coward based on how they behave. I mean, can we face that reality? And I'm not accusing the listener of this. I'm speaking broadly in that, again, I would say that society at this point, it actually depends upon the cowardice of the people. Like it in some ways is seemingly dependent upon a cowardly populace. Right. Again, what would Jesus do / what wouldn't Jesus do, and again, here's how it's a principle. If the circumstances change and the principle changes, it wasn't a principle in the first place. So, and I'm not, see, a fake it till you make it would be for me to just intellectually understand, well, my tax dollars, if I get a job, the government seizes a portion of my wages for itself and uses that for all sorts of nefarious evil activities. So to fake it till I make it would be to say, okay, well, now I'm refusing employment, right? But that fake it till you make it would be to not actually be, without the true knowledge of self, not understanding that, well, the reason why Jesus, were he here, most likely wouldn't have a job is he wouldn't be capable of it. Because again, the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, I would assert, wouldn't do any of this in the first place. Right. It would not perform based on making rich people richer within a system that directly funds, immoral and evil, destructive, harmful activities. Right. Also known as the federal government. Right. So at this point, it's not the laziness of Benton. It's not, which there's not a lot. There's never been much of that, but it's not the me just, I have a principle. Well, it wasn't that long ago that, I had no problem working and having taxes deducted, on a W-2. And I don't want to say, never say never. Again, when I say never, it seems like I end up doing that, whatever that is. But, at this point, were I to trade my time and efforts for Federal Reserve notes, to exchange them, I'm pretty sure that's not going to be happening on the books, right? And it would probably also depend upon, what's the work, what, is the work even worthy? Because if you, all of these fear tactics and cowardice around, a person who's not going to support society and evil and all of these things in the business system, a lot of those fears, if we're only looking at a basic subsistence standard of eating, shelter, and clothing, it's just not difficult. It's just not difficult to do, right? This idea of, why is it so hard to make a living? Well, it's 2025. I remember 1987. There was not nearly as many things to waste one's money on in 1987. And what I see with the general public, I see most people are unable to delay gratification. Most people have very low levels of self-control. Most people are highly susceptible to marketing and advertising. So there's way more marketing and advertising directed at the people. There's way more products and services that they're expected to engage in, or that they're unable to delay gratification, right? Meanwhile, when I was a young person, culturally, it was still the Depression era mindset more often than not, which was to only ever purchase what's absolutely necessary. If it's not absolutely necessary, we don't buy it. Now, some of that was for a period of time. There wasn't money for anything other than the necessities, and there may not have been money for the necessities. When Americans today whine and cry about the cost of living and, you know, uh, how unaffordable life is, until those individuals strip themselves down to just only purchasing what they have to have. And I've done this. I did this around 2010. Me and ex-wife number two, we got squeezed financially to the point where I had us on a very strict budget, and we adhered to a strict written budget. And there was no, well, but I want to do this, and how do I feel? It wasn't a factor. There was no feelings. There was no nothing. There was a, hey, we're going to pay the rent. We're going to have the rent money on the first. We're going to have the money for the electric bill. And this is how we're going to do it. And by God, we did it. And anybody can do that, but it requires discipline, right? Anybody can develop the discipline. So Americans don't even know what's going on at those levels of only buying what's absolutely necessary, right? Because the fact is, economics are a certain way right now. If a person had the ability to do what I can do and what I've demonstrated, which is to just slam the brakes on and to immediately uh, transform their entire lifestyle overnight, what they'll find is, well, they are able to pay their rent. They are able to pay their electric bill, right? They are able to put gas in their car, but they're not able to do that and do all these other things that they're unable to say no to. So what happens to the individual, and I've observed this even in the 90s, because of my own just, inherent high levels of discipline, I noticed other people, especially the people who would say, hey, can you loan me a few bucks? And I began to realize a pattern, which is, oh, these people, they get paid and they go out and do all of the things that they want to do. And then the bills come due, and here comes the mad scramble to try to pay all the bills. And that's most Americans, and that's been most Americans for a long time now. Now, of course, the wealthy don't live in that world, right? The actual wealthy, they don't live. They live in a far different world. So I know on some level whatever difficulties I go through in the near future, and then meanwhile, for me personally, employment in the way that it exists today, it creates more problems for me than the paycheck solves, if that makes sense. To at this point, for me to go seek employment gives me more problems than the paycheck solves. And I don't know that that's ever been the case, historically. And that's a real thing. And, at a certain point, and part of me wandering, long enough to, traveling and not accessing employment on a regular basis for probably 10 years or however long that was. Some of that was a recognition that I knew that I have certain talents and abilities, and that I do make productive use of my time no matter what. In the long run, there may be periods of stagnation, but or seeming stagnation, but in the long run, I'm always making productive use of my time. So at a certain point, it was like, oh, the system of employment, and a lot of this was again all on the heels of the 0809 crisis. It's like, oh, the system's no longer willing to give me easy access to enough money to go out here and continue and just enjoying myself. And realizing at a certain point, well, my time is better served directed inwardly, you know, for my own purposes versus just de facto given to corporations and businesses. Meanwhile, when I was still able to live, some version of Pinocchio's fucking whatever they called that island they all went to party, Pleasure Island or whatever. Yeah, as long as I was able to live some version of that, I was happy to work 40 or more hours a week. But as soon as it was, oh, now I'm working 40 hours a week just to meet the bare minimum standard, right, of keeping my cars running and only need the car to go to the job, and then always having the rent money on time, but I only really need the apartment to be presentable for the job, and then only really need a job so that I'll have the car and the apartment. It's becomes a three-headed monster. And I figured all that out a long time ago, but um it needs to be worth my time. If it doesn't work for me, and this is part of what I've been preaching on in the streets lately, if it doesn't work for me, why would I do it? It's just this assumption of, well, you're here, you're a person, and persons have to work. Well, not all of them. There's a lot of people who don't work. But this idea of someone, well, you're able-bodied and you're not independently wealthy, therefore you must go slave away for corporations and to make rich people richer. And then that's as much as people may tell me that, well, who are you to be entitled to anything? And I would say, well, who are the rich people to be entitled to a never-ending record profits? Because rich people are certainly behaving as if they are entitled to you know uh, a self-perpetuating, never-ending, growing wealth, right? And that's done on the backs of the poor folks. So, and now this may be changing through technology, but up until this point, the mechanism whereby rich people are able to always become richer perpetually in each new moment is that poor people are becoming poorer every moment perpetually. I mean, that's what is happening, right? Um, and that's why society is as it is in many ways. It's not the reason, but it's certainly a reason. Oh, what? Why are there all these homeless people? Well, there's always been homeless people. There's way more, right? Well, that's because in order for rich people to get richer every new moment into perpetuity, which is the function of the economy, and it never fails to achieve its purpose, somebody's got to get a little bit poorer somewhere. It's a zero-sum game, folks. It's a zero. And meanwhile, as one of the few people who studied 0809, now I'm reading news articles and I'm listening to, every once in a while I find a channel where somebody intelligently speaks about finance and economics. And now I'm starting to see a term that was taboo, mortgage-backed securities. Because remember in the 0809, the bailouts and all of that, what was implied to the people was that, oh, there was all these mortgage-backed securities and derivatives. Well, we fixed all of that. We got rid of all of that. No, they didn't fix any of that. They didn't get rid of any of it. Right. So now I'm starting to, now with the public having no memory, I'm starting to hear the term mortgage-backed securities again, which you can imagine you can just imagine the where that slightly angry just thinking about it in the moment, but that's probably the great healing. Actually, some of those repressed energies of the past are seeing their exit. Oh, look, here's a reason to feel anger, because in my experience, that healing happens when I am able to experience the stagnated, repressed energies, and then they're released, because the way that they stagnated and were captured within my energy sphere in the first place was that when the events occurred, the process of repression was utilized for me to not actually experience the emotions that, went along with the event itself, if that makes sense, or the events. Right. And I certainly have way less, you know, uh, pent up anger than in the past, which I had a very great deal of it, even, somewhat recently within the last few years. But so part of the great healing is to deliver me, from that, or of that anger, and I did, anger feels good a lot of times. I used it as an effective fuel for much of my life. And, there is a sort of an optimism, a newness to sort of discovering a new way of life without, you know, acting on anger or using anger in certain ways. And I would say on a weekly basis now, I experience, moments of anger. It's only a few times, and so many days I'm not having that experience at all. Whereas, I probably was virtually all of the time, for many years. And then, just the health impacts of that alone, just being constantly fucking furious. Wow. I mean, what does that do to the hormones? Goodness gracious. I don't know if StreamYard's going to cut me off. I'm pretty close to the monthly 20 hours or whatever they give you. In fact, that's most of the reason I went live today. I saw that my 20 hours restarts like day after tomorrow. So might as well use up the rest of it. But yeah, interesting topics. We're not ending yet, but certainly grateful that folks may find some sort of benefit in this, or whatever it is that people get out of it. Yeah, VC in the chat says consumerism is the perfection of slavery is a YouTube video that just got recommended. He hasn't watched it yet. Yeah, it's interesting. What's up, Rick? Uh-oh. Uncle Rick down there. Well, yeah, that's Joe says, could it be Joe Moore? Could it be that keeping up with the Joneses is a form of mass psychosis? I think it's become that in many ways. Um, I'm less a fan of thinking about, something like mass psychosis, but that does go along with Joe, what I've talked about, that it seems to me like the mind control is actually built into the delusion itself. So that would actually support what you're saying about the mass psychosis, because, a populace existing within a delusion, right? And the delusion has mind control built into it. And that mind control acts upon, the masses, but individually, right? Um, Over time, yeah, it seems to me like that would lead to psychosis. Yeah, absolutely. And also what I've talked about for years, the idea that the general public is de facto insane, right? Well, an insane person is, can be or is probably often also experiences psychosis. So yeah, you're probably right on it there, Bubba. You're probably right on the money. I expect. Oh yeah, doing great, Rick. Well, and you know, like I can't. Obviously, I'm experienced struggle and strife, and you know, as everyone does, but I'm experiencing so much less of it, especially when we get to anxiety, which again, people are now so anxious that um, I was probably a little more neurotic and anxious for a boy who grew up when and where I grew up. So by that standard, but then compared, so I was probably more on the neurotic or anxious scale compared to my male peers that I grew up with. But then if I compare, my average level of anxiety before the true knowledge of self kicked in, that would have been much lower than much of the populace, I would say. Again, society progressing to where, now a lot of the videos I see, a lot of the content I've been consuming, it's at this point, it's a foregone conclusion that your average young person, especially a female, but your average younger person, in their 20s or whatever, is experiencing high levels of anxiety on a daily basis. It's just pretty much like just baked into the cake at this point. And, when I talk about a great healing, part of that is, you know, I'm just going to have to guess that I now have access. I have even more direct access to healing because there's less fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, depression, negativity, just negative states of being. I'm experiencing probably 90% less of that than I was. And so that frees up a lot of resources, right? So, there's not a whole lot that can, quote, go wrong. Um, I still notice a lot of things, the realm fucking with me, and, in ways that are certainly specific to me, to trigger the old autism. And every once in a while, I see something happen to somebody else that I'm sure, you know, could frustrate them. But, I'm not that bothered or frustrated by it. Nowadays, it's more of just I'm recognizing, oh yeah, there's the delusory realm doing that thing to me again that it likes to do to me. It's happening again. Of course it is. Right. Of course, I'm being attacked. And when I talked about, being spiritually attacked when I first wake up in the morning, that's almost over with. Like now it's almost comically, the attack is like so comically weak at this point. It's almost laughable. Uh, and, I'm almost never having that, uh, specific physiological response, immediately upon awakening. And man, I wake up, I feel great. It's just, which a lot of that is just again, a great healing. It's not that I feel great. What I would say is that is in a vacuum, that's probably the default state of a human, is to feel fucking fantastic. Right. So just the levels of relaxation, the good night's sleep, um, the not getting immediately carried away into a thousand different worries and concerns upon awakening, because what is there to be concerned about in this place? Right. Well, from the context of me, the person, in the performing as Benton, right? In this performance being given as Benton within this delusory realm, well, that's now happening based on true knowledge of self. So that's in some ways true knowledge of self speaking, saying, well, I mean, there's nothing important enough here for me to be concerned about. I mean, I almost hate to say it that way, because again, the mind control, the realm of business, how much of that is tied into you know, people, in order to be accepted, the maintaining of a reputation or being viewed as somebody who's an upstanding citizen who will do the right thing, and a lot of that is avoiding the potential losing of face and something could possibly indicate a person um, who was I kind of lost my train of somebody paused at my car. I think they noticed the extensive hail damage and they were commenting on the hail damage in Spanish, I believe is what happened. But yeah, that's the true knowledge of self-talking. It's like, so on the one hand, the idea that there's nothing of value, compared to the value that what I am, that force that I know myself to be one with, that value that represents. So by comparison, well, what's of value here worth having? Nothing. Because I was born with everything in that from that context, but knowing, right? Not speculations or being told that and then saying, well, wait a minute, so why all the fear, why all the struggle, why all the strife, why all the depression and anxiety and worry and guilt and shame? Well, how is that reconciled? You know, um, yeah, it's very interesting, certainly. But so on the one hand, the acknowledgement there's nothing really worth having. Well, there's certainly what's worth it for me to even choose to worry or be concerned about. Because at this point, worry is a choice. Stress is a choice, right? Because the moment I experience fear, anxiety, stress, any of that, I immediately know, oh, I'm failing to properly identify within myself based on what I know myself to be, what I know what I am. So that's an error, that's sin, and that's a cursing of one's blessing. That's what sin is. Sin is when I'm not, now that I'm aware of what I am, sin is to temporarily fall away from properly actively identifying within myself based on what I know myself to be. And then the human defaults to what? Identification with this realm. So that's the default. The person, that's the fall of man. The fall of man is to default to strongly identifying with the validity of whatever the fuck is going on in your particular corner of delusory dystopia. And all the, well, we have to do this and we have to do that. Well, no, you've made choices where that's what you believe you have to do based on the choices you've made. The reality is nobody has to do anything but live and die outside of basic bodily functions once they reach the majority age, right? Don't have to do anything. There you go. Joe Moore says toxic guilt and shame kept him in the 808 mindset vibration. Yeah, there you go. And people who, you know, people are victims of guilt and shame. However, you know, by seeking to raise their vibrations, mind, body, and spirit over time, eventually the ignorance goes away to where they can realize, oh, my choices led to this, and in conjunction with being offered up to a pagan deity called Moloch, and then you know in conjunction with the mind control of the delusion, and again, you know look at what I am, look at how great what I am is, that this delusion sees fit to create so many mechanisms and means to attack me spiritually and materially, and on a day-to-day basis, especially back in the days when I was more inclined to identify via what I did for a living, or the idea of contributing to society, right? So, because in my view, logically, I believe I can make the case that the only way I can contribute to society at this point would be addition through subtraction, meaning remove myself from it as much as possible. You know, that would be the greatest way to contribute. Meanwhile, again, mind control, the idea that my very existence or my identity and whether or not the people around me are willing to accept me being based in large part on to what extent am I willing to contribute to, again, a profoundly ill society through my own efforts. And those efforts are so time consuming, so arduous, so draining, so exhausting, so infuriating, so maddening, right? In service of making rich people richer. Again, I'm here to tell you that what I'm being taught currently, among other things, is that the central theme of the teachings of Jesus is, hey, knock it the fuck off with the with the wealth seeking and the involving oneself in business and consumption, right? And all of that. And it seems like it had to be occulted to some point or hidden back in the time. It doesn't seem like Jesus would have been free. Now, it is interesting that he apparently taught and preached in Galilee, which was not the big city, apparently. And then when he went into Jerusalem and kept on with the same ideas, that then they accosted and arrested and killed him, Jesus, in the story of the Bible, right? So it seemed like he physically went into what probably would, I'm assuming, was this like the center of economic and political power, right? And another theme of what I've been preaching on publicly is this: there's only two things that this realm, and again, the U.S. really, I'm speaking in the context of the United States. There's only two things that this world or this country is concerned about. And that's power and money. That's it. The government only speaks the language of power and money, which is why these protests and all of this has become so comical. It's like, yeah, that's not the language of power and money. Rioting and destruction, and of course that's the system itself doing all of that, as we know, for the most part. But and marching around with signs and I talk about the psychological damage, the schism caused when a person believes that they oppose ICE, but then, especially where I'm at in California and Los Angeles, but then they still go to work every day and pay for ICE, which by definition is supporting ICE. Like the entire system of employment in this country supports ICE. Is if all official on the books jobs, right? And I don't know, at a certain point, it may not be possible for me to work at all. I don't know. I'm just assuming at this point that that there's a possibility of finding, so-called under the table work, which I don't even like that term. People's minds are so in the gutter these days. But well, I shouldn't even say these days, but off the books. And it's funny because also, I forget how much of a badass I am in a lot of ways. So it's like at a certain point, just because of how I physically look and my own, bearing and my own nature, the way I come across to people, at a certain point, I become the Mr. Peanut of immigration. Meaning like, oh, there he is. There's something we can, use to embody and personify ICE, right? There he is, and I forget, like, over 100 times in my life, well, maybe 1,000 times, I've stood with the amigos waiting for work at a Home Depot. Right. So if we count the times that I went to the MLK Workers Center in Portland and signed up for their lottery and then the people who need a day laborer show up, and then it's, it goes in order of when you got your number pulled. If I count that with the amount of times I stood outside the Home Depot in Austin, Texas, I've probably gotten picked up for work for day labor 100 times. So in order to actually get that much work, we're into the hundreds of times, because a lot of times it was just stand around and there's no work, or they pick somebody else, or it's the lottery system and there's no number called. Or Austin had their own version of that worker center, and I went there several times, and I think I only got work once, and certainly in California, they don't really pick up white people for day labor, in my experience. Certainly not in Santa Barbara. I've never attempted it in LA. And then, yeah, I know I can sign up with one of those services, Labor Ready, but then now we're back to the tax paying. That's a W-2 FICA situation. So back to that. Anti-ICE, and also giving their money to ICE. Yeah, and that's what I mean, is like, so once a person, so if I look up the dictionary definition of the word support, I promise you, to pay my money for it is part of the definition of support. So once the person supports ICE with their tax dollars, is it even possible for them to exist in opposition? I would say it's not. I would say, they're actually not anti-ICE, because they're supporting it by how can I support something by definition and claim to be that doesn't even seem possible. So now I got to look up the meaning of the word support, even though I know I'm right. I'm compelled. I don't have to, but support. To back or favor a cause, party, etc., mentally or with concrete aid. So I'm pretty sure one's tax dollars could be considered concrete aid. It also means to help, particularly financially, to subsidize, right? Ooh, to assist or be involved with, but not be responsible for. That's interesting. I'll have to do some thinking on that definition. Yeah, it might be a little more nuanced than I originally suspected, but I'll give that some thought over time, certainly. Yeah, and VC says that's hilarious, and yeah, if you mean the fact that people are all these lefties out here, and again, there's nothing wrong with actual liberals, but the ones who are actual liberals who are definitely don't like what ICE is doing, and then the lefties who are vehemently opposed, and a lot of them don't have jobs, but some of them do. Yeah, it is kind of hilarious. Again, it's sad. My basis for compassion, it is sad also. And it shows the level of mind control, the cognitive dissonance. And it is an acknowledgement at a certain point. And some of these diatribes I go on publicly, it does, when the people are attempting to figure out how to get me to leave because they want to do business, right? And them not knowing that when politely asked to move it along so business can be conducted, that I consider that to be reasonable. So I always choose. That's my principle, right? When treated like a human being while if I'm delivering a diatribe, if someone patiently approaches me as a human being, as if I might actually be a human being, a reasonable human being who can be appealed to via reason, and just is like, hey, if you don't mind, we're about to do some business over here, so pretty please with sugar on top, could you just beat it, right? That's I've always do, because it's reasonable, because I don't have to be right there. And usually I was already there doing the thing, and then business showed up and started to make, like a pop-up flea market or just whatever's going on, or I'm usually an early bird, right? But the authoritarianism, what I found out recently when I happened to be near a flea market, that was, people show up and set up their booths and everything and bring their wares. At a certain point, some of the fellas thought, well, at first it was a lady, but they're behaving in an authoritarian fashion, right? Trying to forcibly, move me along. Look at how quickly people turn into authoritarians, and probably the system of business, right? Like they're, especially when economics becomes more difficult. They're probably worried about, you know, they're already worried about how much are they going to make today, probably, and now we got this bozo, just right here, you know. And it's funny because it was this idea that I'm making people feel uncomfortable or whatever. And it's like, well, number one, there's no proof of that. Number two, like that would be a superpower. So now you're conferring now I have the ability to make individuals feel specific emotions like that. That would on some level be a superpower, right? And it's like, my pink elephant argument is always, well, I'm imagining a pink elephant. I can't prove it. Like you'd be taking my word for it if I told you I was imagining a pink elephant right now. We can't, like, we can't quantify someone's claim of discomfort. Meanwhile, based on everything I'm saying, people are supposed to be disturbed by things that are disturbing. And I would say that this realm, America as being conducted and operated is disturbing. Like to face the full reality of this system of things as it unfolds, how could that not be disturbing? So yeah, what I would say is, well, they probably should be having those feelings. Now, the fact that they're choosing to claim that I'm the source of those feelings, again, how can I be the source of what they claim to feel in this moment when, if I had never been born, everything would be exactly as it is right now, as far as the way society operates, the social problems, the economic factors? None of that has changed because I'm here speaking on it. So my logical argument would be, well, actually, I would say that they're supposed to feel that way, but not because I'm speaking on topics that are generally not spoken about publicly. It's that the fact that all of that exists in the first place is why that's actually the way they claim I'm making them feel. They probably should feel that way all the time. To live in reality without, again, true knowledge of self. And that in fact was a lot of now that I look back on it, a lot of my internal states were based on insisting on living in reality and not being in the mental health system and not being on pharmaceutical drugs. I actually ran myself through a gauntlet of a lot of negative states of being and negative emotions because I was hell bent on facing this reality as directly as possible. And I remain committed to that. I committed myself to that many, many years ago. And in fact, it was a bit self-serving because I recognized at a certain point that, oh, I'm not going to be able to maintain my sanity unless I face this motherfucker exactly as it is, or at least as close to its own nature as I'm able to get. Like, I'm not one of these people who I absolutely would not have been able to maintain my sanity over all of these years of homelessness. It was, my ability and just in a lot of ways my stubbornly, forcing myself into that. Um, an entire year you're learning about what led up to the 0809 global financial crisis, for example. Like that's what that is. That's so uncomfortable, disorienting, painful. Most people would never even do it on that basis. Right. In a lot of ways, I had to in order to maintain my own sanity. And now, at this point, 50 years old, I've done such a great job of operating my own very powerful mind. And it was very powerful even before the recent true knowledge of self achievement was unlocked within the game, right? Um, that was a breakthrough to another level, clearly. And yeah, so now some may say, so now what's the, the purpose? Well, my purpose is to be of service. And then again, it's not for me to guide and steer that. That's the larger, the what I am one with. Again, in the moment, it's the righteous expression of what I am that serves. I mean, that's what that force does, that force of love and creation. It is service, right? Um, it's the part where I try to imagine ahead of time how is that going to manifest or what is that going to look like. Well, I have no idea. I don't know what that's going to look like. And that's part of the fun, you know. And that's part of a big part of where these churches get everything wrong is, all their service, it's all directed through, in order that the people serving are made as comfortable as possible. They are instructed and they're shown, and they know exactly what it's going to look like. Maybe once or twice a month they volunteer at whatever soup kitchen, and then their church has a rotating groups that go out and do this, that, and the third, and food banks, and all of the various activities, right? Well, so already I know well, that's probably not where my service is going to be, most likely, although it could be, right? And it's a thing. It happens. It's again Bruce Lee's, the fist, the punch just punches, right? There's no thought. It just expresses. There's no instruction given, right? The thing knows what to do. And again, the Christian notion of that I'm some lowly, wretched sinner, wicked and dirty. No, that's what this realm teaches. This realm, Moloch's machine teaches people that they're lowly and wretched and filthy and disgusting and repugnant. Right. True knowledge of self is to say, well, I don't even know what that is. So what are you talking about? Huh? What? Caesar's wealth has no redemptive value. Therefore, it has no value. If we all agree to some extent on how fucked up this place is, and, knowing we're leaving it at some point, and a lot of us, not wanting to come back here, uh, it's a recognition of basically if it's alive, it's representative of the force that I know myself to be one with. And if it's not one with that force, it can't live. It can't know life. Caesar as a concept can never know life. Money as a concept can never know life. There's no life there, right? The money supply can never exist at the level of a living spirit or being, right? It's nature's death, right? It's a dead thing. That's all it ever is. Now I understand it can mimic life in the way that it flows and all of these things, but in service of what? In service of death. All they that hate what I am love death. Thanks for watching. Bye.